Charles Schulz, the man behind the world's most beloved comic strip, Peanuts, spent over 4 decades hunched over his drawing board, crafting a universe of small yet profound moments. Every line he drew carried a piece of his soul, every panel a reflection of life's quiet struggles and fleeting joys. But in the final chapter of his life, the world witnessed a moment that was as intimate as it was historic. A single phone call that would abruptly close the door on an era. "I'm done." By the late 1990 seconds, Schulz was no longer the young, energetic cartoonist brimming with creative zeal. He had crossed into his 60s, his eyes still sharp, but his body showing signs of inevitable fatigue. Medical warnings came regularly, urging caution, yet Schulz persisted, driven by a compulsion that only true artists know. Each morning, he sat at his drawing table in St. Paul, Minnesota, pen in hand, sketching Charlie Brown, Snoopy, and the entire Peanuts ensemble with the same meticulous care as decades before. The strip had become more than entertainment. It was a mirror reflecting the hopes, disappointments, and humor of generations. Yet, behind the cheerful simplicity of Peanuts lay a man confronting the frailty of life. Schulz sensed the limits of his endurance with every heartbeat. He felt the pressure of Time not as an abstract concept, but as an immediate, pressing reality. A lifetime of drawing, of shaping the lives of characters adored by millions, was suddenly measured against a body that could no longer keep pace. He was a man whose identity was intertwined with his work, now facing a profound question: continue the daily ritual, or step away before the body betrayed the mind. On that fateful day, the phone rang. On the other end was the editor of United Feature Syndicate, the syndicate responsible for distributing Peanuts to newspapers worldwide. The conversation, ordinary in appearance, carried extraordinary weight. The editor spoke with concern for Schulz's health, suggesting that perhaps it was time to rest, to step back from the relentless schedule of producing daily strips. But for Schulz, Peanuts was not a job. It was the very pulse of his life. The idea of walking away from the characters he had nurtured for decades seemed unthinkable. And then, in that brief, decisive moment, Schulz uttered the words that would echo far beyond the quiet room in Minnesota: "I'm done." No anger, no regret. Simply a declaration of finality. In those 2 words lay the weight of a lifetime, the culmination of a career that had touched hearts worldwide. Peanuts would end not because of waning popularity, not because of commercial pressures, but because its creator had chosen to stop, to honor both his limits and his legacy. The world would soon realize the gravity of this decision. Newspapers across the United States and beyond would print the final strips, the daily tales of Charlie Brown's insecurities, Snoopy's flights of fancy, and Lucy's unrelenting psychiatry stand, now frozen in time. Millions of readers, accustomed to the comforting rhythm of these stories, would encounter an ending unlike any other, a conclusion dictated not by narrative necessity, but by the life of the artist he himself. Schulz's final weeks were marked by the quiet dignity of a man at peace with his choice. He completed the last Peanut strip, fully aware it would be the last contribution he could make. Within those simple frames lay the essence of his vision: humor, vulnerability, hope, and the melancholy that underscores all human experience. The strip would live on, eternal in syndication, in books, in hearts, yet Schulz would not witness its continued daily creation. In reflecting upon Schulz's decision, one sees more than the ending of a comic strip. One sees an artist asserting control over his life and work, refusing to compromise the integrity of either. "I'm done" was not defeat. It was mastery. It was the understanding that every life, like every panel, has its limits, and that leaving on one's own terms is a rare kind of courage. Peanuts, in its 40-year span, had chronicled the subtleties of human emotion through the lens of children and a dog with boundless imagination. When Schulz spoke those two words, he crystallized his own humanity within his art. The persistence, the dedication, the love, and the inevitable acceptance of mortality. He left behind a legacy of laughter and introspection, a gentle yet piercing testament to the power of honesty in storytelling. Even as the world mourned the end of Peanuts, it also celebrated the life of its creator. Schulz had given more than a comic strip. He had given a blueprint for emotional truth, a map of the human condition delivered with simplicity and grace. His choice to stop, to acknowledge his limits, elevated him from a master cartoonist to a figure of profound integrity, reminding us that every great work carries the mark of its creator, and that sometimes knowing when to step away is the final, most significant act of creation. And so, in a quiet room in Street Paul, with pen set aside and heart heavy but fulfilled, Charles Schulz made his final decision. "I'm done." A simple phrase, yet it resonated across continents, across generations, across the hearts of millions. It was an ending, yes, but also a testament. A man who lived entirely for his art, who gave the world his soul, and who left on his own terms, leaving Peanuts eternal, unaltered, and forever cherished. Charles Schulz's childhood was the quiet forge in which the foundations of Peanuts were cast. Born on November 20th, 1922, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, he grew up in a world that was at once ordinary and quietly imposing. The Great Depression loomed over his early years, shaping his perceptions of hardship, limitation, and resilience. His family, modest in means, could not shield Chaim from the weight of the era's uncertainty, yet it was precisely this backdrop that nurtured a keen observational eye and a delicate sense of empathy, qualities that would later define his work. As a boy, Schulz was introspective, often lost in thought, carrying within him a sensitivity that others sometimes mistook for fragility. He was small in stature, quiet in demeanor, and yet possessed an inner intensity, a focus that allowed Chaim to retreat into his own imaginative world. In school, he was sometimes bullied, a victim of teasing and exclusion, experiences that would echo in the endless trials and social anxieties faced by Charlie Brown. These early encounters with rejection and embarrassment were never forgotten. They were absorbed and transformed into art, becoming the emotional scaffolding of a comic strip that was at once universal and deeply personal. Schulz discovered drawing almost instinctively, a way to assert presence, to make sense of the world, and to communicate feelings that words often failed to capture. His father, Carl Schulz, was a cautious man, wary of the uncertainties of a career in art, yet he recognized the boy's talent and did not stand in his way. At the same time, his mother, Dina, provided encouragement, nurturing his creativity even amidst financial strain. In these household dynamics, Schulz learned early lessons about discipline, compromise, and the quiet negotiation between passion and practicality. The Minneapolis of Schulz's youth was neither harsh nor indulgent. It was steady, rhythmically cold in winter, suffused with the routines of working-class life. He observed neighbors, classmates, and the patterns of small-town existence with the eyes of both participant and chronicler. He noticed the awkwardness of human interaction, the triumphs and defeats that seemed trivial at the TMA, yet accumulated in the memory like sedimentary layers of experience. These observations were seeds that would later sprout as the intricate, emotionally resonant vignettes of Peanuts, where each character encapsulated a fragment of the human condition Schulz had witnessed firsthand. Art was Schulz's sanctuary and his voice. Even as a young boy, he devoted hours to sketching, drawing not only what he saw, but what he felt. The small injustices, the private joys, the unspoken fears. By the age of 8, he was submitting cartoons to local newspapers, facing rejections that would become formative. Each denial, each "not quite right," taught him resilience and patience. Schulz internalized these lessons, understanding that artistry was inseparable from persistence. Rejection did not deter him, it honed him, shaping a meticulousness and clarity that would characterize every Peanuts strip. In adolescence, Schulz's sense of humor began to crystallize, often tinged with irony, wit, and a keen sense of human fallibility. He noticed the peculiarities of his peers, the subtleties of social hierarchy, the delicate dance of pride and embarrassment. These early insights were the blueprint for the psychological depth of his characters. The earnestness of Charlie Brown, the assertiveness of Lucy, the imaginative audacity of Snoopy. He began to understand that humor could coexist with pathos, that laughter often springs from vulnerability, that the simplest drawings can convey profound truths about life. World events intersected with his personal development in ways both subtle and stark. The shadow of World War II cast its presence over his late teenage years. Schulz served briefly in the military, an experience that exposed him to the broader human condition, to the fragility of existence, and to the universality of hope and despair. These experiences deepened his understanding of character, conflict, and consequence. They imbued him with a sense of narrative urgency, a recognition that stories, whether drawn on paper or lived in real life, must grapple with both struggle and resilience. By the time he entered adulthood, Schulz had accumulated a trove of personal experiences, childhood fears, social awkwardness, humor sharpened by observation, the weight of historical circumstances, all of which converged in his artistic vision. In 1949, he began the strip that would become Peanuts, initially appearing as Lil Folks in a regional newspaper. It was here that the essence of his storytelling matured. Simple lines, expressive faces, and dialogue that was at once concise and laden with emotional resonance. Every character, every scenario, was a reflection of Schulz's own journey, a synthesis of childhood memories, personal anxieties, and the lessons learned through observation and introspection. Schulz's early life was a crucible of empathy and discipline, shaping an artist capable of translating the minutiae of daily existence into narratives that resonated globally. The rejection, the loneliness, the acute awareness of human foibles all became the lifeblood of Peanuts. Charlie Brown's perpetual struggles were not fictional exaggerations, but distilled reflections of Schulz's own experiences as a boy navigating the complexity of social life and the uncertainty of growing up. The humor and tenderness of Peanuts were inseparable from the reality Schulz had endured, making the strip not merely entertainment, but a mirror in which readers could see themselves, their joys, their sorrows, and their quiet victories. Through this lens, the origins of Peanuts are inseparable from the life of Charles Schulz, the boy who drew to make sense of the world, the young man who honed resilience through rejection, the adult who translated pain into art. Each strip became a testament to the power of observation, the necessity of empathy, and the enduring influence of early experiences on a creative life. By understanding Schulz's childhood, we begin to see why Peanuts, though deceptively simple, resonated with authenticity and universality. Because it was born from a life lived with keen attention, emotional honesty, and relentless devotion to craft. After years of painstaking effort, Charles Schulz began to see the fruits of his dedication emerge. In 1950, his comic strip, initially called Lil Folks, caught the attention of the wider public. Syndication offered him the chance to reach a national audience, and in October of that year, Peanuts debuted in 7 newspapers. For Schulz, this was not merely a professional milestone. It was the validation of a lifetime of perseverance, an acknowledgement that his vision could resonate far beyond the small circles of Minnesota. The early days of Peanuts were far from easy. Schulz faced relentless pressure to produce daily strips, each one needing to balance humor, narrative cohesion, and emotional depth. Unlike other cartoonists who might have leaned on recurring gags or formulaic punchlines, Schulz insisted on authenticity. Charlie Brown's failures, Lucy's unrelenting assertiveness, Linus's philosophical musings, and Snoopy's flights of fantasy were not contrived. They were drawn from careful observation of human behavior, childhood dynamics, and Schulz's own introspective nature. This dedication to truth in storytelling distinguished Peanuts immediately from its contemporaries. As the strip gained popularity, Schulz encountered the duality of success: adulation and expectation, freedom and constraint. Fans adored Peanuts for its honesty, its ability to reflect the anxieties, hopes, and small triumphs of everyday life. Yet, this same popularity created immense pressure to maintain consistency, to avoid disappointing readers who had come to see the strip as a daily companion. Schulz, ever meticulous, approached each drawing session with a mixture of reverence and anxiety, knowing that millions of people around the globe awaited the outcome of his pen. By the late 1950s, Peanuts had begun to appear in over 100 newspapers. Schulz's characters had matured, evolved in subtle ways, gaining depth and complexity while maintaining the universal relatability that endeared them to readers. Snoopy's imaginative adventures atop his doghouse became a metaphor for aspiration and escape, while Charlie Brown's persistent attempts and inevitable disappointments mirrored the human condition in its most candid form. It was a blend of comedy and melancholy, of whimsy and reflection that struck a chord across generations. Despite his growing fame, Schulz remained remarkably humble, often retreating to the quiet of his studio rather than seeking the spotlight. Interviews and public appearances were approached with cautious diligence, yet it was in the creation itself that he found solace. Drawing was more than a profession. It was a ritual, a daily meditation that allowed Chaim to process the complexities of life, to engage with joy and sorrow, and to translate emotion into accessible art. Each line carried intention, each expression a narrative in miniature. As Peanuts entered the 1960s and 70s, its reach expanded internationally. Schulz's work was translated into multiple languages, appearing in newspapers around the world, capturing audiences with its simplicity and profundity. This global recognition brought its own challenges. Schulz had to maintain consistency in tone and quality, ensuring that the essence of Peanuts remained intact across cultures and continents. Yet he did so without compromise, preserving the intimate, human qualities that had made the strip beloved in the first place. In tandem with syndication, Schulz explored other media, including television specials and merchandise. Animated adaptations like A Charlie Brown Christmas introduced the characters to new generations, embedding them even more deeply into the cultural consciousness. While some cartoonists might have been tempted to dilute or commercialize their creations, Schulz remained steadfast. Each adaptation, each product, was approached with care, reflecting his commitment to the integrity of his work. The balance between commercial success and artistic fidelity was delicate, yet he navigated it with remarkable skill. Behind the scenes, Schulz's personal life intertwined with his professional achievements. His family provided support and stability, yet the demands of daily cartooning left little room for respite. Long hours, meticulous planning, and the relentless expectation of creativity were constants. It was not a life without strain. The very intensity that produced Peanuts also exacted a personal toll. Yet, through discipline and devotion, Schulz transformed these pressures into productivity, and his labor produced work that millions would cherish for decades. By the 80s and 90s, Peanuts had become more than a comic strip. It was a cultural institution, a mirror reflecting societal norms, childhood anxieties, and the universal quest for meaning. Schulz, now a veteran artist, continued to innovate subtly, introducing new characters, exploring philosophical themes, and embedding gentle social commentary. The simplicity of the artwork belied the complexity of the narratives, a duality that distinguished Peanuts and cemented its status as a masterpiece of sequential art. Throughout his career, Schulz's ascent was marked by resilience, creativity, and unwavering integrity. He faced challenges typical of any creative profession: deadlines, criticism, the potential for burnout, but he navigated them with an almost singular focus. His rise was not meteoric. It was steady, deliberate, shaped by decades of disciplined practice, introspection, and a profound understanding of human emotion. The success of Peanuts was a reflection not just of artistic talent, but of Schulz's ability to translate the ordinary, the mundane, and the personal into a universal language of humor, empathy, and reflection. The culmination of this rise was a body of work that spanned 50 years, touching millions of lives with the quiet power of observation, honesty, and humor. Every character bore a piece of Schulz's own experience, every storyline an echo of his insights into life's challenges and small victories. It was a career built on the relentless pursuit of excellence, guided by a commitment to truth, and enriched by the depth of human understanding. Schulz's journey from a shy, observant boy in Minneapolis to the creator of one of the world's most cherished comic strips stands as a testament to the transformative power of dedication, talent, and an unwavering belief in one's vision. By the 1980s, Charles Schulz had reached a pinnacle few artists ever experience. Peanuts was no longer merely a comic strip, it was a cultural phenomenon. Millions of readers followed the daily escapades of Charlie Brown, Snoopy, and the entire gang. Television specials, merchandising, and public appearances had expanded the reach of his characters far beyond the printed page, embedding Peanuts into the very fabric of American life and, increasingly, global consciousness. Yet with fame came a weight Schulz could never have anticipated. Success brought a constant, unyielding pressure. Each day, Schulz faced the relentless demand of producing a strip that would satisfy the millions who had come to depend on it. Readers expected wit, emotional resonance, and the signature simplicity that defined Peanuts. One misstep could betray decades of trust and devotion. For Schulz, this expectation was both motivating and burdensome. The joy of creation was intertwined with the anxiety of maintaining a standard that seemed impossibly high, yet indispensable. The world adored Peanuts, but Schulz's personal life was a different narrative. Despite public acclaim, he often felt the isolating solitude that accompanies creative genius. Days were consumed by drawing, scripting, and overseeing adaptations, leaving little room for rest or ordinary human interaction. He bore the invisible weight of responsibility not only to his audience, but to the integrity of the work itself. Each character carried his emotional imprint, and each storyline reflected his understanding of human nature. Compromise was unthinkable. Integrity was paramount. The more he succeeded, the more he felt the gravity of sustaining it. In this period, Schulz also confronted evolving cultural landscapes. Peanuts, while timeless, needed to remain relevant in a world undergoing rapid social and technological change. Schulz approached these challenges with subtlety. New characters emerged. Storylines touched upon contemporary issues, yet never at the expense of the core principles that made Peanuts beloved: honesty, empathy, and gentle humor. He understood that innovation must coexist with consistency, that change without thought could unravel the delicate balance of expectation and tradition. The television adaptations, particularly the holiday specials, brought both acclaim and additional demands. Productions like It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, and A Charlie Brown Christmas became touchstones of American culture. Yet the process required Schulz to extend his creative energy beyond the daily strip. Each adaptation had to preserve the essence of his characters, their personalities, and their moral clarity. Schulz oversaw scripts, dialogue, and visual fidelity with meticulous care, refusing to allow shortcuts or commercial compromise. His perfectionism, while a source of artistic strength, exacted a personal toll. Despite the accolades, Schulz was acutely aware of his own mortality and limitations. He had spent nearly 50 years creating Peanuts without missing a single daily strip, a feat remarkable in its consistency and dedication. But with age came the reality of physical decline, and with decline came difficult choices. The same hands that had drawn hundreds of thousands of panels now showed signs of fatigue. Long hours became grueling, concentration more taxing. For Schulz, acknowledging this reality was never easy. To step away from Peanuts, even temporarily, felt tantamount to abandoning a part of he himself. It was also a period marked by reflection. Schulz understood the profound impact of his work on the world. Letters poured in from readers who found solace, inspiration, and recognition of their own struggles in Peanuts. People wrote of loneliness eased by Snoopy's antics, insecurities mirrored in Charlie Brown, and moral lessons taught gently yet indelibly. The responsibility of wielding such influence weighed heavily on Chaim. Every strip was a conversation with the audience, a dialogue that could not be ignored or trivialized. He carried this weight with both pride and apprehension. Meanwhile, Schulz's personal relationships were layered with complexity. His family, though supportive, witnessed the intensity with which he approached his art. Long hours at the studio and the relentless drive for perfection created distance. He navigated this tension with the same sensitivity that characterized his work, balancing devotion to craft with attention to personal obligations. Yet, there was an undercurrent of solitude, that even fame could not dispel a quiet acknowledgement that his identity was inseparable from Peanuts, and that the world would never know the private sacrifices behind the public success. At the peak of his fame, Schulz also faced the inevitability of succession and legacy. Could anyone else capture the nuance, the empathy, and the precise comedic timing that defined the strip? These questions lingered, unspoken yet persistent. Schulz understood that Peanuts was intimately tied to his perspective, his experiences, his voice. Any attempt to replicate it without Chaim would risk diluting its essence. This awareness reinforced his commitment to quality, even as it amplified the tension between duty and mortality. By the late 1990s, it became increasingly clear to Schulz that a transition was inevitable. Health concerns, coupled with the relentless pace of daily creation, signaled that the end of the strip was approaching. Yet the decision of when and how to step away was profoundly personal. He wrestled with the paradox of desire and necessity, the desire to continue the work that defined him, and the necessity of honoring his own limits. This internal struggle culminated in the fateful phone call, the moment when the abstract contemplation of endings became a tangible, irrevocable choice. That call, in which he declared, "I'm done," marked the intersection of career, identity, and mortality. It was a decision forged in decades of discipline, reflection, and unwavering dedication. Schulz's choice was not a surrender, but an assertion of control over the narrative of his life and his work. In that instant, the creator and the creation became inseparable. Peanuts would end not with arbitrary closure or commercial mandate, but with the deliberate hand of its author. The world would mourn the loss of new strips, yet the integrity of the work remained untarnished, a final act of fidelity to both art and audience. At the apex of his career, Schulz's life exemplified the duality of triumph and burden. Fame brought admiration and influence, yet also relentless expectation and profound solitude. The creative mind that had captivated millions was simultaneously constrained by the physical and emotional demands of daily production. Yet, through these challenges, Schulz maintained the clarity of vision that had made Peanuts timeless. Humor infused with honesty, simplicity suffused with depth, and a profound empathy for the human condition. The rise and peak of Charles Schulz's career are a study in contrasts: public adoration against private isolation, boundless creativity tempered by finite human energy, cultural dominance balanced against personal integrity. It is a narrative of discipline, vision, and relentless commitment, a life in which the ordinary experiences of childhood, observation, and reflection coalesced into art that touched the hearts of generations. Schulz's ascent was not a meteoric fluke. It was a deliberate, painstaking journey, culminating in a body of work that would endure far beyond the limitations of his own lifetime. Even as Charles Schulz stood at the pinnacle of his career, the veneer of success could not entirely conceal the undercurrents of strain and vulnerability that had long accompanied him. Fame, while enviable, brought scrutiny, expectation, and the weight of legacy in a manner that few could fully comprehend. The very strip that had brought joy to millions became, in subtle ways, a measure of his own limitations. As Peanuts expanded into new media, Schulz felt the tension between artistic integrity and commercial demand more acutely than ever. One of the challenges was the sheer relentlessness of the daily strip. 50 years of unwavering productivity had trained Schulz into a routine of precision and discipline, yet the human body and spirit have limits. Hand cramps, fatigue, and mounting health issues began to shadow the creative process. Each morning, as he settled before the drawing board, there was an unspoken anxiety. Could he sustain the standard that millions expected? The strip had become not only his livelihood, but his identity, entwined so completely with his being that to falter would be to betray he himself and his audience. Beyond physical exhaustion, Schulz faced the internal struggle of emotional weariness. Humor, even in its most gentle forms, requires energy, empathy, and insight. The very qualities that made Peanuts resonate: its subtlety, its poignancy, its quiet reflection of human insecurity, demanded emotional investment. After decades of translating life's anxieties into accessible art, Schulz experienced what many artists recognize as creative fatigue. The sensation that every idea, every joke, every emotional beat had to be weighed, measured, and perfected. Mistakes or misjudgments could not be risked. The moral and emotional truth of the strip depended on his fidelity. Commercial expansion brought another layer of complexity. With Peanuts' translation into television specials, merchandise, and international publications, Schulz's creative authority was tested. Negotiations over licensing, adaptations, and merchandising could have diluted the essence of the characters, yet Schulz insisted on involvement in every detail. Each project required vigilance, ensuring Snoopy's personality remained intact, that Charlie Brown's trials and triumphs were authentic, and that the humor was never cheapened. This protective oversight was exhausting, but necessary for preserving the strip's integrity. Schulz had become both artist and gatekeeper, balancing creativity with stewardship. Simultaneously, personal controversies arose, subtle but persistent. Critics occasionally questioned whether Peanuts reflected outdated cultural norms or failed to address contemporary societal issues. While Schulz's approach was never overtly political, the subtle messages embedded in his storytelling about fairness, empathy, and resilience were sometimes interpreted as conservative or idealized. These critiques, though infrequent, compounded the internal pressure he felt. Every strip carried weight, every character a responsibility, and any misstep could reverberate in ways that felt disproportionate to the simplicity of the medium. In addition, Schulz's relationships, though supportive, were complicated by the demands of his work. Long hours at the studio created distance from family and friends. Social engagement, necessary for human connection and creative inspiration, was often sacrificed to the imperatives of daily production. This solitude, however self-chosen, sometimes felt like a burden. The very devotion that produced Peanuts also imposed isolation. a paradox that few outside the creative sphere could truly grasp. His identity was inseparable from his work, and yet that inseparability exacted a psychological toll. Financial pressures, while secondary to his creative priorities, also played a role in the late stages of his career. Licensing, merchandising, and syndication revenue required management and negotiation, adding layers of responsibility that were unfamiliar to an artist trained primarily in drawing and storytelling. Schulz navigated these challenges with a combination of pragmatism and cautious oversight, but they contributed to the mounting stress and awareness that sustaining Peanuts was not merely a matter of creativity, it was also a matter of endurance. By the 90s, the cumulative effect of these factors, physical strain, emotional fatigue, commercial oversight, and public expectation, created an awareness of decline. Schulz recognized the limits of his own body, the fragility of human energy, and the necessity of honesty with oneself. The very act of creating daily strips, once a source of joy and identity, now carried the weight of inevitability. He understood that every line drawn was a testament to dedication, but also a reminder of finitude. The same hands that had produced thousands of panels now trembled with the demands of precision and perfection. It was during this period that Schulz confronted the existential reality of ending Peanuts. Unlike many artistic retirements, which are gradual or partial, Schulz faced the need for a definitive closure. The decision was fraught with complexity. Ending the strip would mean relinquishing daily interaction with a work that defined his life, yet continuing indefinitely risked compromising the quality and authenticity that had made Peanuts enduring. The tension between personal well-being and professional responsibility reached a crescendo, demanding a decision both moral and practical. When the call finally came, the fateful phone conversation with his editor, Schulz's choice crystallized. "I'm done," he said. In those words lay decades of labor, passion, and sacrifice. It was not an admission of defeat, but a declaration of control, a final assertion of authorship. Peanuts would end because its creator chose the moment, preserving the integrity of the work and honoring the boundaries of his own life. In that instant, the burdens, controversies, and pressures converged into a singular act of closure, an ending born of reflection, courage, and uncompromising fidelity to art. Schulz's declaration also revealed the paradoxical nature of creative life. The very success that brings recognition also imposes constraints. The very joy that motivates can become a source of strain. The dark side of his late career fatigue, scrutiny, commercial tension, and personal isolation was inseparable from the brilliance of Peanuts. To understand the depth of his achievement, one must acknowledge not only the joy he gave the world, but the private struggles he endured to ensure that joy remained authentic, untainted, and resonant. Even in decline, Schulz exemplified a rare mastery, the ability to recognize limits without compromising principles, to assert authority over one's own legacy, and to transform fatigue and pressure into a final act of artistry. The challenges, controversies, and strain of his later years were not failures, but integral to the story of Peanuts. A story of dedication, resilience, and the unflinching pursuit of truth in art. They highlight the human cost behind seemingly effortless genius and illuminate the quiet, often invisible battles that shape enduring creativity. Through the lens of Part 5, we see a man confronting mortality, balancing fame with personal well-being, and navigating the invisible pressures that accompany a life dedicated to art. Schulz's struggles underscore a universal truth. Every creative triumph is accompanied by sacrifice, every legacy forged with effort, vigilance, and emotional labor. The dark side of his career does not diminish his achievement. Rather, it deepens our appreciation for the discipline, courage, and honesty that allowed Peanuts to become eternal even as its creator approached the twilight of his life. Once Charles Schulz uttered the words, "I'm done," the implications rippled far beyond the quiet confines of his Street Paul studio. The declaration, simple yet irrevocable, marked the end of an era that had shaped popular culture for nearly 50 years. Newspapers around the world braced for the final Peanut strips. Editors, syndicates, and fans alike sensed the gravity of the moment. The strip would no longer be a daily companion, no longer a mirror for the small victories and failures of ordinary life. Schulz's choice, though profoundly personal, became a public event, a historical punctuation point in the annals of American art. In the immediate aftermath, Schulz experienced a mixture of relief and profound melancholy. The daily obligation, which had both defined and constrained him, was lifted. Yet, the act of letting go brought a stark confrontation with mortality and legacy. Every panel completed, every line of dialogue finalized, was a reminder that the work he had devoted his life to would now exist without future editions. The world would read, reflect, and remember. But Schulz himself would no longer shape these narratives day by day. This awareness brought a poignant clarity. The creator and his creation had reached a junction that could not be reversed. Fans' reactions were instantaneous and intense. Letters poured in from readers expressing admiration, gratitude, and sorrow. Many recalled childhood memories of reading Peanuts, finding solace in Charlie Brown's persistence, Snoopy's imagination, and the subtle wisdom embedded in the daily routines of a comic strip. The emotional resonance of Peanuts had always been profound, yet the knowledge that the strip would no longer evolve gave these connections an added poignancy. Schulz, who had always approached his audience with care and empathy, now faced the finality of not responding through new creations. The personal bonds between artist and reader were preserved in memory, frozen in the strips themselves, yet the living conversation had ended. During his final weeks, Schulz remained diligently at work. He completed the last strips with the meticulous attention to detail that had characterized his career. Each drawing, each expression, each snippet of dialogue was crafted with the precision of a man, ensuring that his final words to the world would be both authentic and enduring. The act of completing Peanuts became an almost ritualistic closure, a meditation on a life devoted entirely to art. Schulz was aware that he was concluding not merely a comic strip, but a narrative that had intertwined with the lives of millions and reflected the universal experiences of childhood, failure, humor, and hope. Health concerns, however, loomed ominously. Schulz, now in his late 70s, was contending with the natural decline of age and underlying medical issues that had long been a private concern. Yet, he faced these challenges with the same stoicism and commitment that had governed his approach to art, quietly, methodically, and without complaint. The act of finishing Peanuts was a testament to resilience, an assertion that even in the shadow of mortality, the dedication to one's craft can define the final chapters of a life. The physical frailty contrasted with the enduring vitality of his work, highlighting the human cost behind the seemingly effortless humor and insight of Peanuts. The final strip itself, published in newspapers worldwide, reflected Schulz's sensitivity and understanding of closure. There was no sensationalism, no dramatic farewell. Instead, there was a quiet, reflective tone, consistent with the spirit of Peanuts. Characters retained their essence, humor and pathos balanced delicately, and the strip concluded with dignity and emotional resonance. Readers recognized the gravity of the moment. The end was not abrupt, nor did it feel contrived. It was the natural culmination of a lifelong commitment, a work that had matured and grown alongside its creator. As the days passed following the final strip, Schulz's reflection deepened. The weight of legacy, the permanence of his decision, and the impending reality of his own mortality combined to create a profound introspection. He understood that Peanuts would continue to be read, cherished, and studied long after his passing, Yet, he also recognized that the daily act of creation, his intimate conversation with the audience, was irrevocably over. The strips themselves became monuments, silent yet eloquent witnesses to a career that had shaped the emotional landscape of modern culture. In these final days, Schulz also reconciled with the paradox of life and art, that the work outlives the creator, preserving moments of human truth and emotional resonance beyond the limitations of flesh and time. He contemplated the balance between personal sacrifice and public legacy, acknowledging that the solitude, discipline, and devotion required to sustain Peanuts were intrinsic to its enduring impact. The struggles, anxieties, and relentless dedication of a lifetime were crystallized in the enduring charm, humor, and wisdom of the strip itself. Family and close colleagues remained supportive, providing comfort and companionship as Schulz navigated the final weeks. They witnessed the quiet heroism of a man confronting the end with grace, completing a work that had become inseparable from his identity. Though physically fragile, his mental engagement with the characters, their lives, and their ongoing influence remained vivid until the very end. Schulz's life, like his art, was a delicate interplay of persistence, empathy, and creative insight, a balance that sustained Chaim until the final act. Charles Schulz passed away on February 12, 2000, leaving behind a legacy that would be immortal. Peanuts, complete and untarnished, remained as a testament to his talent, integrity, and dedication. The finality of the strip, the clarity of his decision to stop, and the enduring relevance of his characters created a unique convergence of life, art, and legacy. Millions mourned the loss, yet celebrated the gift he had left, a body of work that could entertain, console, and teach for generations to come. In retrospect, the consequences of Schulz's choice, "I'm done," extend beyond the end of a comic strip. They illuminate the humanity of an artist, the intricacies of creative labor, and the delicate equilibrium between personal well-being and professional devotion. His final days, though shadowed by physical decline and the weight of finality, were marked by clarity, purpose, and an unwavering fidelity to his creation. Schulz's act of completion, deliberate and courageous, transforms the conclusion of Peanuts from a mere ending into a profound testament to the power of choice, integrity, and artistic vision. The final strips endure not only as entertainment, but as enduring lessons in empathy, resilience, and the quiet dignity of labor performed with devotion. Schulz's legacy reminds us that true art is inseparable from the human experience. It carries the imprint of struggle, triumph, and the courage to conclude on one's own terms. The world remembers Charles Schulz, not only for the laughter he provided, but for the life he lived, the battles he navigated, and the clarity with which he faced the end. Charles Schulz's legacy is both immediate and eternal. Peanuts, the comic strip he nurtured from its inception to its final publication, remains a cornerstone of popular culture. A mirror reflecting the nuances of human experience with clarity, humor, and gentle wisdom. Unlike many ephemeral forms of entertainment, Peanuts endures not because it relied on trends, but because it captured universal truths, the anxieties, the small triumphs, the quiet failures, and the understated joys of everyday life. Schulz's work transcended its medium, influencing generations of artists, writers, and readers, and creating a cultural vocabulary that continues to resonate across continents. The characters themselves, Charlie Brown, Snoopy, Lucy, Linus, Peppermint Patty, and countless others, serve as avatars for human emotion. They are at once archetypal and deeply personal, reflections of Schulz's own childhood, observations, and inner life. Charlie Brown's persistent failures and unwavering hope mirror the vulnerability and resilience of every individual. Snoopy's flights of imagination and whimsical audacity embody the desire for freedom and expression. Linus's philosophical musings remind readers of the enduring value of contemplation and belief. Each character is a distillation of Schulz's insight into human nature, an expression of empathy honed over decades of observation, experience, and emotional engagement. Beyond the individual characters, Schulz's storytelling pioneered a distinctive form of emotional economy. His panels, deceptively simple in their visual presentation, are dense with narrative and emotional content. Humor is intertwined with pathos, brevity with profundity, and each strip functions as a microcosm of life itself. Readers, whether children or adults, encounter layers of meaning, often discovering new insights upon each revisit. This careful calibration of simplicity and depth is a testament to Schulz's mastery, a reminder that genius often lies in the ability to convey complex truths through apparent simplicity. The broader influence of Peanuts is evident not only in art and literature, but in the fabric of cultural consciousness. Schulz's work informed animated storytelling, children's literature, and media representation of everyday life. Television specials such as A Charlie Brown Christmas and It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, became touchstones of seasonal ritual, embedding Schulz's characters into collective memory. The moral lessons, gentle humor, and emotional honesty resonated beyond age, language, and geography. Peanuts became a medium through which people could reflect upon their own fears, hopes, and dreams. Often, without conscious awareness, Schulz's decision to end Peanuts at the height of his career adds a layer of profundity to his legacy. By choosing closure rather than indefinite continuation, he preserved the integrity of the work, preventing dilution or compromise. The final strips remain unaltered, pure expressions of his vision. This deliberate act of conclusion distinguishes Schulz from many creators whose work continues posthumously, sometimes at the expense of original intent. "I'm done" was not a resignation, but a final, conscious assertion of authorship, a statement that the work stands complete, unmediated, and enduring. Moreover, Schulz's life and decisions illuminate broader truths about creativity, mortality, and human endeavor. The interplay between discipline and inspiration, solitude and engagement, humor and pathos is evident throughout his career. Schulz's relentless devotion to craft, his meticulous attention to detail, and his empathy for the human condition combine to produce art that is both personal and universal. His example demonstrates that artistic achievement is inseparable from the sacrifices, challenges, and integrity that underpin it. Peanuts is not merely entertainment. It is a record of a life fully lived, in service of understanding and reflecting the human experience. The cultural and emotional resonance of Schulz's work continues in academic and artistic contexts. Scholars analyze his strips for their psychological insight, philosophical implications, and narrative economy. Artists cite Schulz as an influence, emulating his ability to convey depth through economy of line and thought. Readers, decades after the publication of the final strip, continue to find guidance, comfort, and joy within the panels. The emotional architecture of Peanuts, its careful construction of empathy, humor, and introspection, remains relevant in an era far removed from the mid-20th century context in which it was created. Yet, beyond accolades, analysis, and influence, Schulz's true legacy resides in the intimate impact upon individuals. Millions recount personal experiences shaped by Peanuts. Moments of reflection inspired by Linus's wisdom, reassurance found in Charlie Brown's persistence, and delight sparked by Snoopy's exuberance. The strip became a companion through formative years, a source of solace in hardship, and a lens through which readers could interpret their own emotional landscapes. Schulz's genius was in translating the ordinary, everyday experiences of life into narratives that felt both personal and universally comprehensible. In contemplating Schulz's life and work, one is reminded of the interplay between art and mortality. His deliberate closure of Peanuts, completed shortly before his passing, underscores a profound awareness of human limitation. Schulz preserved not only the dignity of his characters, but also the authenticity of his own artistic voice. The final act of creation, concluding a lifetime of labor and devotion, embodies a rare clarity, the recognition that endings, like beginnings, are an essential part of narrative and life. Schulz's death did not diminish Peanuts. It amplified the work's resonance, highlighting the conscious choices behind every panel, line, and expression. The enduring relevance of Peanuts also illustrates the power of art to transcend temporality. While Schulz's life was finite, his creation endures. Readers born decades after the first strip appeared encounter its lessons, humor, and humanity anew. The strips function as touchstones, mediators between generations, and reminders that the simplest drawings can convey the most profound truths. This intergenerational resonance is a hallmark of Schulz's achievement, a quiet, persistent demonstration of art's capacity to endure, inform, and console. Ultimately, the story of Charles Schulz and Peanuts is both singular and universal. It is the tale of a man whose observations of childhood, humanity, and everyday life coalesced into art of extraordinary subtlety and eye impact. It is also a story about choices, integrity, and the courage to conclude one's work on one's own terms. "I'm done" echoes not as a note of finality alone, but as a testament to a life lived with intention, creativity, and devotion. Schulz's legacy is a beacon for artists, readers, and anyone seeking to understand the delicate balance between work, life, and the indelible mark one leaves upon the world. In reflecting on Peanuts today, decades after the final strip, one perceives the full magnitude of Schulz's influence. The characters endure as symbols of resilience, imagination, and empathy. The humor remains fresh, the insight timeless, and beyond the panels, the story of Schulz himself, a life of quiet discipline, profound observation, and conscientious closure, offers enduring lessons about the human condition, the responsibilities of creation, and the quiet dignity inherent in completing one's work with integrity.